ended up happening 15 hours after it was supposed to. All right, here is the Prime Minister of Canada to speak to all of you.
Good morning, everyone.
Right now, a lot of people are sitting around the kitchen table with bills, trying to figure out what needs to be paid and how to plan for the coming months. If you've been laid off, had your hours reduced, or are worried about your industry, these might be really stressful decisions. Far too many Canadians are having these tough conversations about finances and their future. Just look at the numbers. Last week, almost 1 million people applied for employment insurance. The hard truth is that people are out of work because of this crisis and worried about what comes next. So I want you to know that we'll be there to help you. Our government is doing everything we can to be there for you. Tôt ce matin,
Early this morning, the House of Commons passed an emergency bill to help people as quickly as possible. The bill is now before the Senate. I do hope that its passage will be done quickly so that we can help Canadians as soon as possible. We will have more details about this later this week and further measures to announce. And this is only the beginning. But this new legislation will allow us to take the necessary measures to support you immediately. We will be enhancing the Canada Child Benefit and delaying by 3 months the time to repay student loans. And with this legislation, we are introducing the new Canada Emergency Response Benefit. This benefit will replace the two benefits we announced last week, the Emergency Care Benefit and the Emergency Support Benefit, in order to simplify the process. As I've been saying from the outset, as the situation evolves, we are adjusting our efforts to help you better. The Canada Emergency Response Benefit will provide $2,000 a month for the next 4 months to workers who are not getting a paycheck because of COVID-19. So if you've lost your job or you were working on a contract basis or were self-employed, this benefit will be there for you. If you're sick or in quarantine, or if you're looking after someone who is infected, this benefit will be there for you. If you have to remain at home without receiving a salary to look after your children, or seniors, this benefit will be there for you. And even if you still have a job but you're not receiving any salary because of the crisis, the new Canada Emergency Response Benefit will be there for you. There will be an online portal to put through applications. It will be available very soon, and people will start to receive money within 10 days of applying.
Emergency Response Benefit will provide $2,000 a month for the next 4 months for workers who lose their income as a result of COVID-19. This will replace the two benefits we announced last week, the Emergency Care Benefit and the Emergency Support Benefit, in order to streamline the process. Like I said from the start, we will adapt our approach wherever needed. If you've lost your job because of COVID-19, whether you're full-time, contract, or self-employed, this new benefit will be there for you. If you're sick or quarantined, looking after someone sick, or at home taking care of your kids, it's there for you. And even if you're still employed but not receiving income because of this crisis, the CERB is there for you. An application portal will launch as quickly as possible, and people should start receiving money within 10 days of applying. I know people are concerned about delays. Families are worried about when they'll get help. It can be hard to get through on the line, and that is frustrating. Public servants are working around the clock while dealing with unprecedented demand and all of the same personal stress everyone else is facing. They will get to your application. Help is on the way. In order to speed things up, we're rapidly deploying workers from different departments to deal with claims. In the last 10 days, we've boosted the team by close to 13,000 people to take your calls, process your claims, and get you the support you need. And since last Monday, we've already processed 143,000 employment insurance claims. That means more money will go directly to people right across the country. We're working to get you the support you need when you need it. And if you're doing okay, there's a way you can help someone else, as an employer, a landlord, or even just a friend, so you can be part of the solution. It can make all the difference, because it's by working together that we'll get through this. And our team knows that. We're collaborating with the provinces and territories, as well as with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nation communities to coordinate our efforts and ensure that everyone is supported. Earlier this week, with the premiers, we also discussed testing for COVID-19. We know that how long you wait for your results varies widely. The premiers and I know we need to address that, and we are. This is something Minister Hajdu and I discuss with officials every day, and we'll continue doing what's needed to speed up results for everyone. But I also want to recognize the incredible work medical professionals are doing on this front. According to Dr. Tam, we're now testing about 10,000 people a day. That's a huge increase in numbers in a very short period of time. And it's because people across the country are working tirelessly to make it happen. At the same time, we're helping companies, labs, and scientific institutions produce and supply what we need most, from masks and ventilators to vaccines and antiviral drugs. We're collaborating with airlines to get Canadians home from abroad and instructing everyone that they must isolate at home for 14 days. We're also working with our international partners on this crisis. This morning, I had calls with President Sall of Senegal and President Kagame of Rwanda to share strategies on keeping people safe and addressing the economic impacts of this pandemic. I've also spoken to Prime Minister Abiy of Ethiopia and President Kenyatta of Kenya about international coordination. And tomorrow, I'll be speaking with other G20 leaders to discuss further global coordination to our response. Plus que jamais,
more than ever, it is absolutely essential that Canadians have access to the most recent information. But like everyone, the media are also feeling the consequences of this virus. To ensure that journalists can continue to do their work, it is even more critical in the midst of a crisis, and therefore our government is announcing measures to support them. Minister Guilbeault will provide additional details later, but in the meantime, I want to thank all journalists and our Canadian media who are keeping Canadians aware of the latest developments with facts and reliable information. We very much appreciate your work.
Right now, it's more important than ever that Canadians have access to the latest news and information. To ensure that journalists can continue to do this vital work, our government is announcing new measures to support them. Minister Guilbeault will have more to say about this shortly, but I want to take a moment to thank our journalists and media for everything they do, today and every day. Above all, the most important way we can work together is by staying apart. Social distancing is our best tool to stop people from getting sick. I know people are seeing different graphs about how effective social distancing can be and new maps tracking the spread of this virus. Every time you turn on the TV or go online, you probably read something new. I know I do. And you'll want to know what's coming next. Today, I'll be getting the latest modeling from the Public Health Agency of Canada, and we'll discuss how to share this information even more directly with all of you. But you deserve the best information we've got about what's happening today and what tomorrow might bring, because otherwise, the uncertainty can be really tough, not just for your routine, but for your mental health, too. We're facing a once-in-a-generation challenge, and on top of that, you can't do many of the things that keep you feeling good, getting together with friends or having dinner with your neighbor. If you need help, reach out to your neighbor, to a sibling, to a friend, to a hotline. But do it from home. Don't go out unless you absolutely have to. If you're already following these rules, thank you for doing your part. If you aren't, know that you're making a dangerous choice, because ignoring these rules puts every single one of us, yourself included, at risk. Voici la réalité.
This is the reality. If people refuse to follow the recommendations, our doctors and nurses have a more likelihood of contracting COVID-19. And if our healthcare professionals get sick, they cannot go to work. And therefore, they cannot take care of you if you get sick. Our country is facing the greatest healthcare crisis in its history. We cannot allow ourselves to put people at risk who take care of our health. So instead of inviting people over for dinner, don't do it. That puts everyone at risk. Grocers, technicians, bus drivers, farmers, people who collect our garbage, all of those people deserve better. We must protect them. It's not hard to do what we're asking you to do. Just stay home. If you absolutely must go out, keep a 2-meter distance between you and others. And if you are coming back from travel abroad, go directly home and stay there for at least 14 days. That applies to everyone. In order to come through this, we must all look after each other, and we must all do our share. I know that we can do this, and I know that Canadians are equal to the task. Thank you.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. Louis Blouin de Radio-Canada.
Radio-Canada. I'd like more clarity with respect to deadlines. April 6th is what Mr. Morneau is saying. Now, in terms of deploying this new benefit, what exactly will happen on April 6th? Will there be an online platform? And under that scenario, that means some people would not receive any help between the middle of April. So what are you going to say to people who need that help right away? First of all, we are working very hard in an unprecedented situation. We understand that there is great pressure to get that help to people as soon as possible. But we also know that there are many, many people who need to be helped in a very short time frame, and we need to develop the systems that can quickly work for us as long as they're reliable. And that is what the government is working on right now, and we do hope to be able to put that system in place by April the 6th with money coming in the following days. We hope that it will be very quick, and we hope to be able to get people applied for it well before that, and that's what we're working on right now. In terms of people who need help now, we know that some people are facing very stressful times. They've stopped working. They've been out of work for 2 weeks, and they're not getting paychecks coming in. So we'll do everything we can to help them with access to credit and other measures as necessary. We are here and listening to you, but we'll have to work very hard together in order to come through this.
We recognize that this is an unprecedented situation with an overwhelming amount of demand by Canadians to get money as quickly as possible. We need to make sure we're getting that money out quickly, but also reliably to Canadians, and that means doing things that government hasn't done before and scaling up our processes extremely quickly. We need to do that in a way that is going to be both reliable and quick, and that's why we're pulling together people from across government to get this done. We are hopeful that the system will be up and running by the 6th of April, and that checks or the direct deposits will be flowing days after that. We recognize that that is a ways off still, and there are people who stopped working a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, that are now receiving their last paycheck and not knowing when the next money is coming in. We recognize that. We're looking for ways to help people bridge through credit or other measures their ability to make it to the arrival of the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, but we will continue to work diligently and rapidly to make sure we're helping every Canadian we can.
Prime Minister Marika Walsh with the Globe and Mail. 60 business groups are calling on Canada to launch a wage subsidy that's in line with the UK and Denmark. So 70 to 80%, they say it would be much more efficient than the slow process that you're rolling out right now. You've been asked about this for several days now. Your question keeps being things are still on the table, but people are laying off workers now. Now you seem to be saying that struggling businesses could choose to simply not pay their employees rather than laying them off, and the workers could then receive payments under this new benefit. Is that what you're urging struggling businesses to do, and why not go with the higher wage subsidy?
We are absolutely looking at more direct help for businesses. We recognize that in an ideal situation, businesses wouldn't have to lay off people, and people wouldn't have to feel like they've lost their job and don't have a job to come back to after this crisis. So we are working with business groups. We are working with small businesses, hearing their concerns, looking very carefully at the models put forward in other parts of the world, like Denmark and Germany and others, and looking at how we can make that work or make equivalent things work here in Canada. We will have more to say on that in the coming days.
We recognize that in an ideal situation, people would not be losing their jobs because of this situation, because of this crisis, and that employers should not have to lay people off. This is something we are trying to resolve with them. We know that there are some models out there that are working in Denmark and Germany, and we would like to help people directly through this Canada Emergency Response Benefit, but at the same time, we want to do things directly for businesses as well, and we will have more to say about that in the coming days.
Hi, Prime Minister. It's Annie Bergeron-Oliver with CTV National News. I know you just talked about more direct support for businesses, but can you be more specific in the meantime? You said it will come out later this week. There are many businesses that have already laid off people. There are people at home who cannot afford to pay their rent, and those checks are due very soon. What specific aid is available right now for people who are sitting at home who cannot afford any of their bills?
Well, for businesses, we moved very quickly to make credit available for them, to help them bridge through this time, to help them get the liquidity they need at a time of crisis and significant slowdown in the economy. For people at home, we recognize that loosening up rules around credit is also a possibility. We've taken certain measures on that. We know people are anxious. We know that their final paychecks from 2 weeks ago, from last week, are starting to come in now, and they don't know where the next one is going to come in or when the next one is come in. That's why the Canada Emergency Response Benefit is going to flow as a way of giving them $2,000 every month for the next 4 months so that we can get through this together.
Bonjour, Raymond Fillon de TVA.
TVA, Prime Minister, you are now in your 14th day of isolation. Does that mean you are free now, starting tomorrow? Does your wife still have symptoms? Thank you for that question. Sophie feels much, much better, and the children and I still do not have any symptoms. We will continue to follow all the recommendations of our healthcare experts. What does that mean? Well, that means that every single day we follow those recommendations, and if the situation changes, we will let you know.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Janet Silver, Global News. With more than 1 million Canadians returning from overseas, especially in hotspots like Europe and New York City, why are we relying on the honor system and not using the Quarantine Act to isolate them, given we know that some people have boarded flights with symptoms just so desperate to get home?
Yeah. It is extremely important that everyone returning to Canada isolate themselves for 14 days. This is a measure that will both keep them safe and prevent further spread of coronavirus through Canada. This is something that we require of every single Canadian coming to this country. We will continue to tell people that. We will continue to highlight that. We will continue to require that of anyone coming into Canada, that they isolate at home for 14 days in order to protect everyone in the country.
How can you require it if it's not mandatory?
It is required for people to stay at home for 14 days.
But it's
Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News. Prime Minister, we've learned that sick Canadian travelers are masking COVID-19 symptoms to get through airport screening. Why does Canada not test temperatures, screen air passengers for fever, or use thermal screening at airports? Should there be thermal screening and consequences for those who mask their symptoms?
We recognize that there are many concerns about passengers returning to Canada, which is why we're asking people to immediately isolate as soon as they get home. It is a requirement. We also know that there are different countries using various technologies, and we will continue to look at what is the best way to keep Canadians safe. There have been a lot of discussion around thermal screening and taking temperatures and spot checks. One of the lessons learned from SARS is that it is simply not as effective as the way people would like it to be, and it can sometimes give a false sense of assurance. This is what the best medical advice and best science advice we are getting is, but we are always open to hearing stronger or different science that says, or different recommendations that say it's worth, but we will make sure that what we choose to do, how we choose to deploy our resources are in the right way to actually help Canadians and actually arrest the spread of this virus.
But Prime Minister, should there be testing, and should passengers who are returning to Canada, should there be consequences for those who mask their symptoms? And should these passengers also be forced to sign a document to make sure they self-isolate? How can you ensure that?
We know that people need to isolate when they land in Canada. They agree to an attestation in their processing when they arrive that they will self-isolate for 14 days. That is an important thing. And Canadians with symptoms will not be allowed to board flights coming home. That is a difficult measure, I know, for many people, for many families, but we need to make sure we're doing everything we can to keep Canadians safe.
But some passengers are masking their symptoms. What are the consequences for that?
Okay. We will continue to do what is necessary and have been explaining to people what it is they need to do in order to keep themselves safe and keep Canadians safe.
On va maintenant passer aux journalistes sur la ligne. Modératrice, c'est à vous.
Merci. Thank you. If you have a question, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad. Si vous avez une question, s'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant. The first question is from Lavon Savance from Radio-Canada International. Please go ahead. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Yes, hello, Prime Minister. Canada, when you came to power, you announced that Canada is back. The United Nations is asking for $2 billion in emergency funding for COVID-19. Is your government prepared to join this fund? And is Canada setting aside equipment to send to countries that are very hard hit and cannot buy this equipment on the market?
In our $1 billion COVID-19 response announced last week, we had already set aside money for international efforts. We, of course, will work with the UN, continue to work with international partners on financial support to ensure that we can respond to this global pandemic with global resources. Canada will be there to participate. And I can also highlight on your second question that we are ramping up production of necessary equipment, of emergency medical equipment, of medications. We know that there is a potential need for much more in Canada, but there is certainly a need for much more around the world. And Canada will be part of the solution, not just to make sure that Canada has all the equipment and supplies needed for our citizens, so should the situation get worse, but we will have, hopefully, equipment and supplies to share with the vulnerable parts of the world that will desperately need help.
Merci. Prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from François Carabin, Journal Métro. Please go ahead. Your line is now open. La parole est à vous.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. François
Good morning,
Carabin,
Mr.
Métro,
Trudeau. It was mentioned yesterday that there would be additional medical equipment to help people who are infected with COVID-19, but on the ground there are nurses who are afraid they won't have that proper medical equipment. Are you able to guarantee the provinces that that medical equipment will be provided to them so that they can care for patients? Thank you for that question. This is something that we had a lengthy discussion about during my call with the premiers. We know that there are different needs at different times depending on the region of the country, and we will do everything necessary to ensure that every area, every region has what it needs to respond to the needs of infected individuals. We want that equipment to be shared across the country, but we will have to continue to deploy our efforts to increase the amount of equipment that is available and the essential equipment that people are looking for. And that's exactly what we're doing. But there has to be better, more coordination between the provinces and the federal government, and that will ensure that we can meet people's needs wherever they are in Canada.
Merci beaucoup. Dernière question.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Justin Ling from Freelance. Please go ahead. Your line is now open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Hi there, Prime Minister. Last week I asked you about the possibility of reducing the prison population to help combat a potential spread of COVID-19. Since then, I've heard from prisoners, inmates, and guards who have said that prisons are not ready, that their release is not being contemplated, that there's not enough soap, that sanitary conditions are even worse, and that guards are being allowed into the prisons even after returning from abroad. What, if anything, are you going to do to continue reducing the risk in Canada's federal institutions, and is releasing inmates, nonviolent offenders, on the table?
We recognize that the incarcerated population is at greater risk of contracting and spreading COVID-19. That is why we are working closely with Corrections Canada to ensure that we're looking at a broad range of measures to keep both those who work in our correctional facilities, but also those who are residents there, to make sure that we're doing things that will keep them safe. I have said multiple times we are not taking anything off the table in terms of options in order to keep Canadians safe, and we will continue our discussions with Corrections Canada to look at options and to look at ways that we're going to keep people safe right across the country, wherever they be.
Je vous remercie beaucoup. C'est qu'est-ce qui mettra fin à la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui.
Merci tout le monde.
Thank you. Merci.
And that is the Prime Minister of Canada wrapping up his daily briefing on COVID-19 pandemic. The major announcement today, as the legislation makes its way now through the Senate, expected to receive royal assent by the end of the day, is this new combined measure that was announced last week under a new name called the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which means that many Canadians who are currently unemployed or about to be unemployed or just don't have enough money to make ends meet for all sorts of reasons related to the pandemic will now have access to this. Let me bring in my colleagues Vashi Kapelis and Catherine Cullen. Vashi, as you had rightly informed us before the Prime Minister spoke, it is going to be $2,000 a month. What else did you take from that?
A couple of things that I would flag, and the first, of course, on what so many Canadians are watching for, and that is the timing of this aid that is supposed to flow. At first, the Prime Minister said that, especially where this new program is concerned, that the application portal, so the page that you go on to apply for this, would be open as quickly as possible. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I heard him later say that they were trying to get that going by April 6th, and then it would be 10 days after that that you would be able to receive those payments. I think that's something that we have to really closely watch. I think he was careful in his wording there not to guarantee that the portal would be up by April the 6th. And my understanding is there is still a lot of concern about even getting the application process going. So I think for people watching, that is something to definitely keep an eye on. Obviously, the sooner that application process gets going, the better for them. But there are no guarantees at this point. The other thing that I wanted to touch on was wage subsidies. And you and Catherine had talked about this. It's hard to overstate how significant this is for businesses businesses right now. We have heard from so many organizations that represent, in particular, small businesses. The CFIB, for example, said that in its survey over the weekend, 1/3 of the businesses that they surveyed said they would not survive the month. They are asking for comparable subsidies to what we see in jurisdictions in Europe, so somewhere to 70 to 80%. The Prime Minister gave more details than he has or than any of his ministers have in the past on this, insofar as he at least said it was something that they're considering. He acknowledged that they perhaps should be looking at something that is comparable to those jurisdictions in Europe. However, again, no timeline attached. He said that more to come in the coming days. And the reason that I focus on the timing issue is because of that 1 month window that so many businesses are looking at. Look, people are, if you know anyone who runs a small business, you know that meeting payroll is hard in the best of times. When you have zero revenue, it becomes nearly impossible. Subsidizing 10% of wages up to $25,000 per employer, the consensus among at least those organizations that represent those businesses is that that is not enough. So I'm very curious to see in the coming days, as the Prime Minister indicates, exactly what they're going to deliver on when it comes to that. And the third thing, just really quickly before you head over to Catherine, is the question around using the Quarantine Act. And this is something we've heard a lot of anecdotally as well, that people are, not even anecdotally, we've seen the imposition of states of emergencies, for example, in provinces, because people are not complying with that recommendation, which is, or order, depending where you live. When you come back from wherever you've been traveling, you have to self-isolate for 14 days. And the Prime Minister was asked why use the honor system? Why not invoke the Quarantine Act, which would, my understanding is, attach some sort of punishment or penalty and a level of enforcement to people who don't comply with that. He really avoided addressing why he wasn't going to use it or whether he would in the future, and instead just re-emphasize the message that we've heard over and over again, which is this is what's expected of you. But I do think he has sort of framed that in the past few days as this is my final warning. You got to listen to what I'm saying. So at the end of the day, will there be a consequence if people aren't listening? Or I don't know. It was pretty unclear. So I thought from my perspective, those were the big things to take away.
Yeah. All right. So that was a press conference from Justin Trudeau. We managed to grab it from off of the CBC News, and there was a brief analysis after that. Thank you for listening, and we will update you as more comes with COVID-19. Thank you.